Welcome back to West Plays Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon, and today we're continuing our talk with Eleni about some helpful playground features for kids on the autism spectrum.
Thank you for having me.
So last time, we were talking about some of the difficulties you face as a caregiver for these kids. And you mentioned fencing as one feature of your ideal playground. Then we finished with a teaser about including stimuli that are very sensory rich. Can you tell me more about what that looks like?
Absolutely. So you want to find ways to incorporate different textures, different sounds, and different sights. I do understand that it's an investment, but if we could incorporate playgrounds where, for example, there's an area where it's like, say, you could have like a wall that has all sorts of sensory input, right? Like if I press this button, it makes this really cool sound, right? And if I kind of pull this lever, for example, I'll be able to touch all these different textures, right? And so being able to kind of give them those opportunities to spin, to jump, to pull, to tug, to push, right? And so they love that. Sensory rich stimuli, I think, is a big one for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's really useful. Like, it seems to be a growing feature and becoming more and more popular to have sensory elements, musical items or gears that turn or a steering wheel, things like that. So that's really interesting to hear that it appeals to them in particular a lot.
Right. I agree. And I think that it's a lot to kind of take in because we also have to think of things that are age appropriate, right? Playgrounds, the idea is not only to cater to 2-3-year-olds, but also to 7-8-year-olds. And so how do you make it sensory rich across all ages within the playground age appropriateness, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
and so
that's
something
a huge
to think
question.
about as well.
Yeah. So we've established that sensory elements definitely appeal to them quite a bit. Are there any traditional playground features that draw their attention that you've noticed?
Well, yeah, I think that's a great question too. I think once you introduce them to that functional toy play aspect, you can definitely help them find interest in those things. And that's why it's so rewarding, but it can also be so tiring for the caregiver and for the parent because it's all about how exciting you make it. You can make it or break it for them. If you go down the slide and you go, woohoo, and you go down the slide and you go, woohoo, that was like the best thing ever, you can just engage them for the next 24 hours if you wanted to. So it's also kind of a 50-50, right? You want to teach them that and also kind of encourage independent play, but also be that active participant in it because it teaches them that social cue as well for when they have that cooperative play with their peers, right?
Yeah, I guess to some extent that sounds a little bit like you have to eat your vegetables versus, yay, carrots!
Right, exactly. We don't realize how much of a difference we make, right? And I think that's a lot of things that are misconstrued. It's a huge misconception. And children on the spectrum, they're really missing that social piece. So I'm just not even going to try to understand them. No, that is your job. Your job is to help them realize how much they're missing out by not having that social piece. And so if you can help them discover that, it just makes a world of a difference.
Okay. How easy is it for kids that are on the spectrum to interact with kids that are not on the spectrum in a playground setting? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to think about is that it depends on the level of severity of their autism. It also depends on how long they've been in therapy for. If some children progress faster than others, and this is just an example, there are fine motor skills. In an 8-hour day, it could take a child just that 8 hours to learn one specific movement. For example, the pincer grip.
Oh, wow.
Right? That can take 8 hours to learn.
Like picking something up, pinching.
Exactly. But there can be other children that require 3 8-hour days to learn the pincer grip.
Okay.
Right. And so it depends, and you kind of a black or white answer, but it really is child dependent. And it depends on how severe their diagnosis is and if they overlap with another disorder, which again, the comorbidity between autism and other disorders can be high sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I know it's not a very clear question either. So it's just something that I always think about when I'm thinking about, okay, who all am I designing this playground for?
Right.
And trying to make sure that I include as many different people as possible that could want to play on it.
Right.
Okay, so what would be kind of a dream playground for you or for these kids?
Yeah, I definitely think incorporating some of those features that we talked about earlier, obviously incorporating the safety aspect for it, which I think can contribute to a parent dream playground, not so much a child, right? Because we're all about exploring when we're young.
Sure.
But I think that's huge. I think incorporating the sensory rich kind of stimuli. I think another important aspect would be kind of developing strategies that will allow children on the spectrum to be in charge of what they're doing. Children on the spectrum do not like surprises. If they are able to kind of know what to expect once you introduce them, hey, this playground has 5 different items or 5 different toys, if you will, right? Teaching them each one and allowing them to kind of take the lead and seeing, because they obviously interests change and vary, but kind of giving them that way to kind of decide on their own what they're going to do to avoid surprises that could potentially end in challenging behavior, right? And low tolerance, because they know and they're frustrated when they can't. Do what others do, and so I think that's definitely a big one. I'm trying to think now another feature for a dream playground. I think a fence. Yes, I know. I keep going back to
you mentioned that earlier.
Right? Yes, absolutely. I think those are the big ones, really.
Okay.
I mean, the set aspect, the safety aspect, and just making sure that if you're taking your child who's on the spectrum to a playground, you really don't want to expose them to a playground that has 50 kids there at once. They will feel very overwhelmed and you won't get anything out of the experience. And so kind of fading them into the experience. And so a playground that will allow, kind of like what we're living now for social distancing.
Sure.
You don't want to have too many items all together cramped, because there might be a child on the autism spectrum that might be in an area that's sensory rich, and then the slide is right beside them, and then a child will slide down the slide and it'll just kind of startle the child who is in their own world in that sensory rich environment. And so being able to very strategically place the items in the playground, I think that's something that we don't really think about. And if we do, then great. But kind of setting the playground up so that if you have a sensory rich station, it is on its own. It's not crossing over with the monkey bars, with the slide, with the swing, and slide with the swing. And I don't know if that's something that you would agree with, but I feel like that's something that would be really beneficial.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a factor. Like when we're thinking about playground layouts and, okay, do we want to have everything together in one unit? Oh, I can put this panel connected to this and connected to this and connected to that. And it's so compact and easy and together. And then like you're saying, that might not actually be the best to get the most use out of those really cool panels that we're putting in.
Right. And I think that kind of goes back to our point earlier about accessibility. I think that kind of gives it a new definition, just kind of making it accessible for children on the spectrum. I know that's not the only population that goes to a playground, but if we're speaking specifically of children on the spectrum, then that would be great.
Yeah.
If you could kind of isolate that area and that way they're a part of something, but they also have their safe space.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think that's something that's actually very doable on most playgrounds, depending on like the allotments for the whole area and some different logistical factors. But I think that's actually fairly doable. So that's really good to be aware of. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's not too extensive, but I think those basic skills and those basic changes or alterations, if you will, would make a world of a difference for parents who I've experienced firsthand really have trouble finding areas that are inclusive for their kids.
Really good things to think about. Thank you. All right, that's another segment done. Thanks, Nalini. See you next segment.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you as well to everyone who's listening. I think we have just one more segment left with Eleni, and we'll talk about a few last questions to wrap up our discussion about playgrounds for kids with autism.
If you have questions or comments about the podcast, I'd love to hear them. You can email me at shannon@westplay.ca, or if you're interested in making your playgrounds more accessible and inclusive, or if you're just curious about what kinds of inclusive accessibility features we can offer, please reach out to play.ca or call us at 604-424-4168. Background music is from silvermansound.com. What a Wonderful Day by Shane Ivers.